Welcome to the DeFi Standard. This is Patty XRP, and with me I have Mickey B. Fresh, and we will be talking to Matt Hamilton, the Director of Developer Relations at RippleX. So, how are you doing today, Matt?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear it. Thanks for joining us today. So one of the things I think we can just start off with is just talking about RippleX a little bit.
Sure.
So, some questions to go in for you to address would be, can you just kind of give a general overview of what the mission is behind that part of Ripple, as well as like kind of target markets that RippleX is looking to go after, and then how you handle coordination with the broader XRP community, because obviously like you guys can't just affect ledger changes on your own.
Right.
It's a big community effort, and everybody has differing opinions on stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So RippleX. So within Ripple, there are two business units. There's RippleNet and there's RippleX. RippleNet is the one that mainly works with the sort of traditional banking infrastructure and moving fiat currencies generally around. Providing they run a system for banks and financial institutions to move value around. Then RippleX is RippleX's mission is to inspire and enable the XRP community to collectively build what we call the Internet of Value. So the Internet of Value goes right the way back to the origins of Ripple, and that is the idea of being able to move value as easily as you can move information, right? So these days, it's like I can stream a live video feed from the International Space Station, but still I'm in the UK, you're in the US. If I try and make a payment to you, it will still take an amount of time. I mean, that might be a fairly quick one, but say I was in Thailand and you were in Peru, right? That would probably take 3 to 5 days for that payment to go through. So the idea behind RippleX is to help the community, help build the community around the XRP ledger that are building solutions on the XRP ledger.
Awesome. And so as far as like target market, so I know broadly people think Ripple's only focused on like institutional movement of like value utilizing like ODL and things like that. I do know like RippleX has their eye on like decentralized finance and things like that.
Yeah.
Would RippleX only be targeting institutions like the RippleNet side of things at this point, or do you think they could
No,
get more into retail? Yeah.
no, not at all. I mean, RippleX are kind of sort of looking at everywhere, right? The point of RippleX, like I said, we're trying to increase the usage of XRP, the XRP ledger, and enabling, the community to build stuff on it. So kind of RippleX, in some ways, our target market is the developers that are building things. So RippleX's target market is not institutions. RippleX's target market is developers. Some of those may want to build stuff for institutions, but they might want to build other things. So for example, at the moment, we're working on things around NFTs. So you've seen the NFT standard that David Schwartz put out,
Yes.
the XLS 20D. So that's a standard for a amendment to the XRP ledger that will make it more efficient for storing and processing NFTs. Now, what are people going to do with that? We don't know. We've currently got a developer grant program running at the moment, and we've had a whole number of submissions for people with various different ideas around what they might do, quite a few of them to do with NFTs. And most of them are not in what you would deem to be Ripple's financial institution target market, right? They're all sorts of things from all across the globe and all different industries doing things.
Awesome.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. So I guess I would throw in a question here now. So that proposal with the NFT is going to take time to be implemented. Would that coincide with the implementation of the sidechains, which I think, I forgot his name, Scott was talking about in the fall time? Is that going to coincide kind of when the sidechains will be implemented and also the NFTs?
Yeah,
the proposal?
They may do. It's an interesting one with the sidechains work, because the ability to have sidechains means that you can deploy a separate kind of instance of the XRP ledger in which you can you can be more experimental on, right? The XRP ledger is really optimized for payments, And so if you're trying to do something like NFTs, which, for example, some people might say, well, that's not really related to payments. And if we implement NFTs, does that cause any detriment to kind of like the core function that the XRP Ledger does around payments? So, you might put NFTs on a side net, for example, and that way you're not affecting the main XRP Ledger. And one of the things being is that different people want different things, right? So it's very difficult to get any changes made to the main XRP Ledger because you have to get consensus agreement. So something like the Sidechains system means that you don't necessarily have to get agreement from everybody on the main network, because you can create effectively your own network that is bridged to the main network. So it will enable, I think the sidechain stuff will enable a different sort of cadence of development that can happen. Now, where NFTs fall into that, I don't know. XRP Labs, for example, are working on the hooks implementation, a hooks system for smart contract-like functionality. That could be implemented on a side chain perhaps, or it could be implemented on the main network. And so this kind of allows, I think, different timing of things to happen. What exactly that timing will be? Well, again, Ripple don't control that. Amendments to the XRP Ledger have to be voted on by the validators on the network, and it has to have 80% approval for 2 weeks. And one of the hard things that kind of I've got to do within RippleX is kind of I've got to keep reminding our product marketing people that we don't control when these things actually happen, right? So we can't say, okay, well, we're going to launch NFTs on the 1st of November, for example, right? Arbitrary date I've just picked out of my head. But, we can't set a date because it's up to the participants of the XRP Ledger as to when that amendment would actually be adopted, and it may never be adopted, right? There's a risk that Ripple could develop something and it doesn't get adopted. So Ripple developed a thing a while back called the checks amendment, and I think that took 2 years to be approved because the rest of the network, didn't necessarily see the value in it that Ripple did. So these things are out of our hand. So my role is to kind of work with developers and try and ensure that what we're doing at RippleX is aligned with what developers want, right? Because there's no point in us building something that developers don't want, and ultimately that the validator operators won't support, because it won't ever see light of day.
Absolutely. And that's interesting that that since you brought up, kind of your specific role in working with developers, I'm curious, like, as far as, just ideas that you have to, kind of broaden how many people actually understand how the XRP ledger is working. I think there's somewhat of a disconnect between people that are developers and really understand how, all the programming and code that goes behind it works. And then people like us that, we weren't trained to be coders or developers. So like, how do you kind of bridge that gap and, get affect that kind of change as well?
Right, exactly. I mean, the XRP community is a broad church, right? And there's people from all different areas in there. There's people in there that are just investors. There are people in there that are developers. So, there's some people on one side that, I know developers that don't even hold any XRP, right? They just really want to build something cool with the XRP ledger, but then they're not even invested in XRP. They don't, care particularly about the price of it or whatever. And then on the other side, you've got some people whose only focus is the price, and they don't care necessarily about development. And we've got everything in between. And so it is quite tricky because it is such a broad market. But kind of from my role, so the strategy I'm working on at the moment with RippleX and with regards to developer relations is, at the moment, we have a number of developers in the community building stuff, but their voice is not necessarily heard, right? There's projects out there that are being developed that people don't necessarily know about. And so when people say, well, what's being built in the XRP community, a lot of times people say, well, not much, right? But actually there's a lot being built, but it's not necessarily as visible. So one of the things I started as soon as I got to Ripple was I started the Twitch stream that I do regularly on Tuesdays. And the idea behind that is to just find people in the community that are building things and say, hey, look, come on, show us what you're building. Let's see from a developer point of view. And there's people that come in and, look on that are not developers, that are just interested in how things work. And that's fantastic. And we might get some people in that are outside the XRP community that want to come and see how things work. But the main focus of this at the moment is the existing XRP developer community. There's I think I've done about 20 shows so far, about 20 episodes. And of those, there's probably like 3 or 4 of them. I had no idea that project even existed until a week before we presented it, right? I didn't even know that this developer existed or what they were building. And they came up to me and said, hey, look, I'm doing this thing. I'd like to tell people about it. And I was like, fantastic, great, come on. So the kind of the strategy I'm using with developer relations is to kind of try and build our existing kind of the sort of the volume, shall we say, in the noise, the volume in terms of the acoustics of what people are doing internally within the community, to kind of build that up and then start bringing in people from external. So the analogy I use is you've got to get the kindling on the fire and get the fire going before you stick a big log on it before you pour the fuel on it, right? So that's kind of what I'm doing, is trying to build up the developers that we currently have, and then we're going to use them as kind of like a beacon to bring in additional developers and people from the larger market as well.
Cool. That sounds good. And kind of, in the vein of that, since we talked a little about the side chains there, one of the things I mentioned, I don't know if you saw David Schwartz's interview with Tony
Yeah.
from Thinking Crypto. So he was
Yeah.
talking about in the future, possibly having a way where you could just like check box, what would you want to see on your side chain from the XRP Ledger mainnet. Do you see that as a way to help? Like, there may be somebody that, doesn't have that level of development skill to, write all this code. Is that a way for people to kind of test ideas, or that idea
Sure.
essentially?
Yeah, definitely. And if you go to some like the cloud service providers, people like AWS and IBM Cloud and Microsoft Azure, they will often have like a marketplace in which you can say, okay, give me one of them or give me one of those, and it will set it all up for you, right? So, I could foresee something, us having something similar to that, maybe, in which you could kind of go in and say, right, give me an XRP Ledger sidechain. And like David said, you could check and you say, right, I want NFT support on here and I want hooks. And, hit a button and it spins out 5 nodes and you can then develop on it or test on it. Now, the question being is how, how decentralized would that be as a sidechain, right? So if a lot of people, for a lot of people, cryptocurrency and blockchain, the whole thing is about decentralization, right? So if you can create a sidechain that is just owned and operated privately by, a single entity that runs, say, 5 nodes, what is the benefit of doing that as a blockchain versus, some other sort of centralized service? And the main advantage being is that it's running exactly the same software that the main net is running. And so you would be able to move that functionality, you'd be able to effectively test it on that side chain. And then once it's tested, not just in a technical term, but in a market term, you could then move it to the main network. Because with the XRP Ledger and the main network, kind of once you've put something on there, it's very difficult to get it off of there, right? You've kind of got to carry that around for life of the network. So, what you don't want to do is have lots of just random little experiments on there that you've then got to carry the baggage of forward, even if they're not used. So using the side chains, you could test something out, you could build something, test and see whether the market adopt it, as well as the technical functionality works. And then once it's proven, you can then say, hey, validators, look, we'd like to move this onto the main network. What do you think? And you've actually then got a proper use case and a proper kind of foundation of which to prove that.
So it sounds like a real world sandbox where you could actually use real world value to test things. And that's what kind of David Schwartz was saying. I like that. I think that's a great idea to get things eventually then proposed onto the ledger, because it's actually tested in the real world and with real value, which is very interesting. Patty, can I jump in and ask a question?
Definitely.
Sure. So one question I do have, Matt, is how would different smart contract languages work on the different side chains? Are the side chains capable of supporting pretty much any type of smart contract language? Like, can the Ethereum virtual machine be supported on one side chain? Can like a DAML be supported on another one? So is it freely open to be used any type of smart contracts, or is there a limit to what could be used on side chains?
You could do whatever you wanted on a side chain, but of course you would have to build that functionality, right? So running Ethereum smart contracts on the XRP Ledger is not something that somebody has kind of built the functionality to do. But if that's what you really wanted to do, and you said, right, I really want to run Ethereum smart contracts on the XRP Ledger, and I'm going to port over the Ethereum virtual machine onto the XRP Ledger and run that in a similar way that they have it running on, say, the Flare network or whatever it might be. So you want to run that Ethereum virtual machine on the XRP Ledger. That's a reasonably controversial thing in terms of the main network, because the main network is typically fairly conservative. But you could do that on a sidechain. Yeah, exactly. And then if people start using it, you then go to the validators and say, look, hey, look, there's 1 million people using this sidechain for smart Ethereum-based smart contracts. When we've proven that it works, we've proven that these are the resource requirements that the validators would need to let's put a vote to move it onto the main network.
Okay, I guess I was more saying, can they say separate on those side chains just for, say, a specific use case? Say they didn't want to adopt it to the main chain. Say it was just for, like a DeFi application or something like that. It could just stay on its side chain and do its own thing. Okay, so I was just saying if they just wanted to be kept on the side chain and just for that use case, say they wanted to do DeFi there with just that Ethereum virtual machine, and say they had no plans to implement it into the actual main chain, can we have side chains that have different types of smart contracts on them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the side chains are entirely governed by the people that run that side chain. So it's entirely up to them, right? If they want to run a particular, application on that side chain, that's up to them, right? And the governance of that sidechain would kind of be a similar governance model to the XRP Ledger, but by the participants in that sidechain. So you might have, some particular group that wants to, like in your example, run Ethereum smart contracts and just keep them on that sidechain. That's great. Go ahead and do that, right? So that would be possible. And in terms of kind of interoperability between sidechains, the sidechains themselves wouldn't necessarily communicate between each other. They would go via the main network. So you might have a smart contract on one side chain do something, and as a result make a payment that ends up on another smart contract on another side chain, and then causes that smart contract to execute something, for example.
Wow, that's excellent. That really opens up a lot of possibilities there in the future.
Yeah.
And so to move on, kind of to go from that, so like since it's being run by the people who are setting up like nodes on the sidechain, what is like the theoretical level of decentralization that these sidechains could achieve in comparison to the main net? Even, and also maybe like how difficult would it be to get to the level of where the main net is now as well?
So the main net at the moment's got about 900, 1,000, something like that, nodes in total. It has 170 validators, and on the XRP Ledger Foundation's UNL, there's I think 39 of them. So, that's the kind of level. If you wanted to get to the same kind of equal level, that's the sort of numbers you would need to kind of hit, really. Not so much the total number of nodes, but at least the validators. If you wanted to have the same sort of notional level of decentralization, then you'd be looking at getting whatever 39 validators running on the network. Now, in practical terms, how to try and say how decentralized it is, it's quite difficult, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like if I've got 1/39th of a vote, is that really any different to me having 1/15th of a vote, right? For example, right? In practical terms, there's probably not much difference.
Yeah.
So, and again, it depends upon what's running on it, and it's entirely up to you. You might decide that, okay, this sidechain is being run specifically for a particular audience, and so we can be a little bit more centralized because we trust each other, right? We're going to set up a sidechain for, I don't know, the an association of like shipping companies or something, right? Because they have some functionality they want, and you have 5 shipping companies run a validator, and they might say, well, we're all part of the same industry. We're that's enough decentralization for us. That works. Or you might have somebody that says, well, we want to have 100 validators, and that's up to them.
Cool. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I can see like there's probably going to be a lot of different use cases for different levels of decentralization you could want. And, to follow that up, I was curious if you kind of have thought about any kind of non-financial related use cases that can utilize like a side chain. So I know like some things would be like in the future, I know medical records getting put on a blockchain to help with the healthcare industry, just like as one example. I
Yeah.
don't know if you have any others you could share.
Yeah, so I mean, that's an interesting example. So with the XRP Ledger, you have a memo field on a transaction. You can store a small amount of data,
Hmm.
right? Not enough to store a medical record, but enough to possibly store the address somewhere else of where the medical record is stored. And you wouldn't want to store the entire medical record on the XRP Ledger because, like I said, that kind of then sticks around forever, right? Well, actually, not necessarily forever, because the XRP Ledger doesn't necessarily have to keep, the nodes don't have to keep full history, right? So if you added the medical record and then deleted it, then there's a chance that after a certain amount of time, that medical record would no longer be on that block, on the nodes that don't keep full history, right? So a side chain you could tune to have different storage requirements or allow different amounts of storage, right? So you could run a modified version of the XRP Ledger in which you say, well, rather than only allowing a small amount of data to be stored, we're going to allow a larger amount of data. And because collectively, we, pardon me, as running the validators, we're happy with that. Right, we're happy with saying that it's going to store a large amount of data, and we're going to need a large amount of memory and disks and yada yada yada, because that's our business model and that's what we want to do. So yes, I can see some non-financial applications. For example, there's been a few people that have tried to make like chat applications or like social media type applications in which the tweets or the messages or the SMSs or whatever are stored as messages on the XRP Ledger. Now, on the main net, that's like I said, that's quite a burden, because anybody who runs a full history node has to keep that entire transaction history of all of those random messages, forever. But you could have a side chain in which you have a defined policy and you say, okay, we will only ever store 6 months worth of history, and so we're only going to store 6 months worth of messages. And so we don't mind if you store loads of messages, because we've set a finite amount that we're going to hold.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think of like, maybe even like supply chain stuff, possibly, like if you use it more as a data storage mechanism. Or like I went to a baseball game the other night and my ticket was $45, but then I had like a $20 transaction fee that they don't like show on, when you purchase the ticket. So like, I can imagine maybe somebody could make some kind of ability to swap like tickets if those get set up as like NFTs in the future. Like that's a longer term use case. But I feel
Yeah.
like there's just a lot of different things that could be covered with this. So it's kind of nice to allow people to do that, but not take away from like, what is the purpose of the main chain, like to keep it lean and fast for payments and all that stuff.
Exactly. And this was the example that David Schwartz made on that Thinking Crypto show, right? Was he was talking about Ethereum, and it's like, okay, Ethereum now has all the smart contract functionality, but Ethereum is no longer very good for payments because you've got the high gas fees, right? If I want to make a payment to you, I'm paying a high gas fee, and I'm paying a high gas fee because crypto kitties, right?
Yeah.
So that's, we don't want the XRP Ledger in a similar situation where the XRP Ledger has to compromise on what it's good at in order to satisfy some other some other requirement that somebody has.
Nice. Um, so I guess in that vein, I'm also kind of curious. So, there's just like throughout the crypto community, I would say like the XRP ledger often gets misconstrued on how it works, by our own community at times. And then, obviously the larger community, like of all the different crypto assets. So I was just curious, like, if there's things that you have seen that get misconstrued the most often that you could address, or just like general things that people maybe misunderstand about the
Oh wow, where
functionality.
do I start with that? You probably know I spend a lot of
Yeah,
time
I do.
dealing with this. So, um, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things like people don't know the history of the XRP ledger. I mean, that's a common one, in that they say, oh, the XRP ledger is controlled by banks, or is for banks, or was created for banks, and it's like, no, the XRP ledger, has nothing to do with banks itself, right? It was created as a means to do peer-to-peer payments, in effect, cutting out banks, right? That was the entire purpose of it. The original Ripple Pay slogan was "Be your own banker," right? And that was 2 or 3 years before Bitcoin even existed. So, there's this perception that it's only useful for financial institutions, or only useful for banks, when it was built to, as a decentralized system for anybody to use. This whole idea of a level playing field, right, is that I should be able to transact with you just as easily as a bank can, right, or banks can transact with each other. So that's something that I think is often misconstrued, that people think that it's part of the big evil system, right, or that it's somehow supporting the big evil system that they don't like, because they don't like centralized banking infrastructure or whatever. And the irony being is that, so yeah, El Salvador's just made Bitcoin legal tender, and so you've got a central bank in El Salvador dealing with Bitcoin, right? So I mean, ironically, I'd probably say there's more banks holding Bitcoin right now than are holding XRP, right? So
Yeah, I agree.
it's kind of like it's kind of strange that XRP just continually gets hit with this thing of, oh, it's it's just for banks, when it's like, no, it's anybody can use it. It just so happens that Ripple's specific use case was financial institutions, and that only kind of came about after the FinCEN case that they had in 2014, I think it was. So Ripple originally had had a end user wallet in which end users registered, and the whole idea was there was no banks or financial institutions anywhere involved. And then FinCEN basically said, you're selling this virtual currency, right? Not a security, virtual currency. You're selling this virtual currency, and you don't have a license to sell a virtual currency. And they fined Ripple, and they instituted certain restrictions on Ripple's operations. One of which was that they could no longer sell XRP to the public directly, and they could no longer offer a Ripple hosted wallet. So Ripple were basically And so by virtue of that, Ripple could no longer deal with the general public. So they had to look around and go, well, what else can we do? And so they worked out, well, let's work, rather than directly with the public, let's work at the layer below and work with other services that the public use. So let's work with payment providers, let's work with banks and financial institutions to get them using the XRP ledger, and people can interact then indirectly with the XRP ledger through mechanisms that they're already familiar with.
Nice. Mickey, do you want to hop in here with some?
Yeah, that was a great explanation, Matt. So for everyone to understand the history, I think that's really important to understand how Ripple had to pivot there at that point in time. But I think now we're seeing with the sidechains, hopefully we'll see more applications that will be directed towards maybe consumers or retail, or maybe just away from financial institutions in general, that will help give a better perception of the XRP ledger in the future, that it's not just like a banker's coin or banker's ledger. So I think the sidechains really, I think, will help with that and help with the perception. But I do have a question about the X addresses. So I know you and David Schwartz touched on that in the Twitch video, and also David touched on it with Tony from Thinking Crypto. Can you go a little more in depth into what X addresses are and how they could be used with these sidechains, and especially with exchanges and their wallets?
Sure. So the X address format, it's just a different way of representing addresses on the XRP Ledger. So as you might know, on the XRP Ledger, you have an address, and then you have a destination tag. And the destination tag is like a sub-extension, a sub-address to the main address. So it's like a telephone number and an extension number, right? It's kind of like that. It's like a street address and then the apartment number. So the idea being is that you could have one address for, say, a exchange, and then a destination tag for each user on that exchange. And so that keeps things a lot more efficient on the XRP Ledger. However, it can be inconvenient for users because they have to then input two pieces of information when they make a payment. So when you go to do a deposit or withdrawal to an exchange, then you have to put in the address and the destination tag. And if you don't put in the destination tag, then often your funds will get sort of mislaid at the destination end, and you have to contact their customer services and say, hey, look, I made this payment, can you please find it, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea behind the X address is it just combines those two things together into a single address. So you can convert, I think if you go to, I think it's xaddress.info, there's a site there, and you can put in your address and a destination tag, and it will give you an X address as a result. And you can go the other way, you can put in X address, and it will give you the standard traditional address that starts with an R and a destination tag. So it's just an addressing format to make things more convenient. Now, for some reason, I'm not quite sure why exchanges have not like particularly adopted this. I'm trying to think of any that really do use it. But the idea being is it should make things just a little bit more convenient for people depositing and withdrawing funds. So in terms of how that relates to the sidechains, again, it just means that there's a more convenient way to represent an address on a sidechain from the main chain and vice versa. So if you're trying to send a payment that crosses from crosses the federator from the main chain to the sidechain or vice versa, then it's just easier for the address to be encoded in the memo field as it passes across.
Excellent, thank you.
Cool. And I'll jump in here with another kind of question around the XRP ledger. And I'm just curious on your thoughts around, so I know I came into one of y'all's Twitch streams one time and just kind of proposed what could we change about consensus or governance that could make the XRP ledger run more efficiently in the future? And obviously the voting is done more so by the validators rather than token holders. And I know we'll see, Flare's one where they're doing, every token holder votes, you have a liquid democracy, but I can see arguments for why not opening it up to everybody is, maybe the best way to keep moving a network forward. So I'm just curious about if there's anything you've had thoughts on as far as consensus or the governance of the XRP ledger that could be evolved in the future, or what we could look to, maybe debate or, just put proposals out.
Yeah, it's a complex topic as to, is there a better way? I don't know. I think we're still trying to work that out. So in the case of the XRP ledger, it's the validators that vote. Now, ultimately, the validators are effectively chosen by the node operators, because it's the node operators that define their UNL, and it's those UNLs that define effectively which validators have a voice on the network. So it's kind of like a bit of like a representational democracy, right? Mm-hmm. You vote for your local representative, they then end up in Parliament and make decisions on your behalf. So versus something that's like a more sort of direct democracy in which each, say, token holder has a vote. And there's kind of pros and cons to each one. So I use Carver, for example. And if you look on Carver's network, they have the voting mechanism where each token holder gets a vote. So each holder of a Carver token gets a vote. The more Carver tokens you hold, the more voting power you have. But I mean, they had a situation where they were due to upgrade their network, and there wasn't enough votes to pass quorum to upgrade the network. So they had to abort and then try again a few weeks later, right? And that wasn't because people voted no, that was just because people didn't vote, right? There was not enough people voting to get quorum. And that was possibly because maybe people didn't necessarily understand what they, and if you said to the average XRP holder, well, should we vote on this amendment to increase this particular parameter on the network, for example, would they know what that means? So it comes down to this sort of age-old question of democracy
Yeah.
in general about, how educated do your voters need to be? I don't think that question has ever really been successfully answered in the world yet.
No, definitely not. And I think you bring up some good points there. Also, I was just thinking, as far so like obviously the whole thing with running nodes is there's no incentive, which is like very different from like Bitcoin or proof of work platforms. But one incentive is that you get to choose your own UNL, and then that effectively affects how votes are going to be made. So you do have some impact in governance.
Yeah.
So it's like a non-monetary incentive, but I do think it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean that's a very good point. I hadn't actually thought of it that way, but yes. So running a node or running a validator, potentially you do then have a say in the network governance. I mean the whole issue around the XRP ledger, the validators not being directly compensated, financially, is again one of those kind of goes back to your point of what things are kind of misunderstood about the XRP ledger, because a lot of people in say like proof of work networks point to the XRP ledger and say, well, the validators aren't compensated. Why would I run a validator? There's no incentive for me to run a validator. That's a bad thing. And, actually, you can make a very good case for the converse that it's a good thing, because the only people that run validators are people that are actually committed to like being interested in the governance of the network, being interested in running a network, right? If you're if you're just going to do a half-assed job of it, then you're not going to probably bother to run a validator, right? The only people that are running validators long term are those that actually really care about the network. And so whilst there's a smaller number, say Bitcoin, of miners or node operators on Bitcoin, the ones that are involved have some other incentive, i.e. they run an exchange, or they run a wallet, or they run trading bots, or whatever it might be, that means that they want to run a node.
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually trying to set up a node for Flare the other day, which will probably end up me like doing an XRP Ledger one as well. So it's
Cool.
like I'm doing it because I'm interested in the network very much. So obviously with like doing this, so I do kind of like obviously being part of XRP community, I do like the no incentive model. I think there's enough people, and I think it's shown at this point that there's enough people running nodes and acting as validators for like it to hold up. But Mickey, I want to pass over to you now to get
Yeah,
some more
so I think
questions.
another thing that has come, so besides the proof of work community getting confused, I think then you have the proof of stake community that get confused, because
Yeah.
everything else that's not proof of work is typically proof of stake out there in crypto, besides a few, Stellar and XRP Ledger. They think that, like, since Ripple holds so much XRP, they have this control over the network, but really the value has no impact on the governance, nor does it have any impact on the actual consensus itself. So I think that's something that I think the overall crypto community just assumes, that just because Ripple has that supply and escrow or a large amount, that it could impact the network, and it doesn't. And it's because the consensus is just different. And that's something, it's difficult to make others understand outside of the XRP community that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, in some ways, again, it goes the opposite way, right? In that Ripple have the most to lose, because they hold the most, right? So, the amount that they hold doesn't give them any extra power, but does mean they've got more to lose, right? So they've got to, that's an incentive for them to act in the best interests of the community, because if they don't, they've got the most to lose from it, right? Every cent that XRP drops in value, Ripple's bottom line, obviously drops, a pretty significant amount, right? So, they've got incentive for everything to work well.
Of course. I guess the next thing, Patty, we should talk a little about the Federators. Did you have a question on there for that?
No, but Matt, if you want to just kind of describe their basic
Yes.
function and how they are going to be put together, I think that would be perfect for everybody.
Sure. So yeah, I did a Twitch stream with Scott Dieterman, and if people haven't checked it out yet, go to the RippleX developer Twitch stream. I mean, it is a more technical basis, but actually on that particular show, we have David Schwartz talking about the general concept of sidechains as well before Scott Dieterman does a demo of how they work. But if you go to twitch.tv/RippleXDev, there's the videos there. So the Federator is basically a piece of software that communicates with the main chain and the side chain, and it basically watches a particular account on the main chain and on the side chain, and watches for transactions coming in and basically relays them from one to the other. So that's basically what it does. It's a gateway that kind of relays transactions from one to the other.
And
okay, so now is there like a multi-sig quorum that keeps that decentralized, or is it just one entity that's trusted?
No, it's a multi-sig quorum. So there's a number of entities on there. So the XRP Ledger is built in sort of multi-signature capability. And I think in the demo that Scott did, I think he had 5 nodes running there that all have to kind of agree and all have to sign the transaction for the transaction to go through.
Okay, so just to break it down for people so they understand here, as of right now, a federator is also a validator. But Scott was talking about eventually at some point breaking it so that a federator doesn't have to be a validator.
Yeah.
Is that correct? So for right now,
correct.
they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Or they would operate the same way.
Yeah, so the federator process is a validator at the moment, just because what Scott's built is kind of like a proof of work to sort of see how this works, and that's the easiest way to kind of get that federator process running, because it has all the information it needs then from the virtue of being a validator. So if he splits it out, then he needs to be able to pass that information from the validators to the federator and back and forth. So but he's looking at doing that, I think, in a future phase.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about terminology and what words are going to be used, like doorway and different things. And I think that is important to, come up with the right term so that it is understood from the beginning. So I'm glad that David Schwartz and Scott and you brought that up, because I think that is important for the community, developer community and regular community, just to understand what these terms mean. Like David was saying that, the word validator over the years has been, misconstrued into something different than they originally thought it was. So I think it is important to take time to, define the terms in the best way and put a glossary together in like xrpl.org so everyone can understand it. And you've done a great job with xrpl.org. Documentation in there is excellent, and everyone in the community should really check that out. It's been updated drastically over the last few months, and it's a really good resource for anyone who wants to learn technical about the XRP
and just
Ledger.
there's a big update coming to that soon as well, a redevelopment. We're doing a redevelopment
nice.
of xrpl.org that'll be coming out soon. So the content predominantly will stay the same, but we're going to make it a lot easier to find the content on there.
Awesome. That's great to hear. That really is. And that will help with the developers and bringing more people into the XRP community, developers community.
Mickey, I just want to see, is there anything else you wanted to address before we kind of wrap up the interview at this point?
I think that's I just had one last question. Maybe you could answer possibly. David Schwartz, in the interview with Tony, he mentioned that it's possible we could see a side chain of just federators. And I wasn't sure what he meant by that in that interview, where he said you could see just the federators then have their own. I'm not sure what that meant. Maybe you could provide some insight.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what he exactly what he meant.
I didn't know what he meant either.
I think what he's referring to is like there's other networks out there, like there's some Ethereum forked networks like Ren and OneChain that basically run as entire blockchains, but their purpose is to effectively be like a federator process, right, between other blockchains. So I think what he was saying is that the federators themselves could effectively be their own blockchain that runs in parallel, and almost like there's separate governance just within the federators for the process of being a federator. I think that's probably what he was talking about.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I like it.
Definitely. And he kind of mentioned also about like, connecting to other ledger or, to other blockchains. Is that something that federators would enable, or would, okay. Could you like briefly touch on what that would entail?
Yeah. So, from the XRP Ledger mainnet's point of view, it doesn't sort of really know or care what the sidechain is, as long as it
Gotcha.
has the particular, functionality that's needed. And so, it wouldn't necessarily have to be an XRP, the sidechain could be something that's not the XRP ledger. It could be an Ethereum-based sidechain, or it could be, a fork of something else, Flare or Avalanche or something, right? But at the moment, for what Scott has built, it is assuming an XRP ledger on the other side. But there's no reason why it couldn't be expanded beyond then. But kind of like what he's focused on in terms of getting this running, we're assuming an XRP ledger on the other side.
Perfect. Yeah, that's definitely a longer term thing, but I think it's just
Mm,
cool kind of to think of the possibilities there. As far as
Yeah,
like interoperability between all these different blockchains, because it doesn't seem like one's just going to win. Like they're all going to be around, and they all have things that they do better than the other ones. So
exactly. And Ripple was probably one of the first companies in the blockchain space to kind of like realize that, right?
hmm
So things like Interledger were started by Ripple because they were said, well, one blockchain is not going to win. People are always going to want to have different blockchains because they're going to have different focuses. They're going to have different strengths and weaknesses. You want to use one that's tailored possibly specifically for one particular use case. So you're always going to need different ones, and kind of Ripple identified that, and that's why they created the Interledger protocol and worked a lot with people like the W3C, the Web Standards Consortium to actually standardize some of these protocols. And so Interledger is another thing similar in a way to what validators do, but Interledger is based around streaming payments rather than specific payments, sort
hmm
of lump sum payments going backwards and forwards.
okay.
But it's a similar kind of concept. And like I said, Ripple were kind of one of the first ones to kind of look at that and go, well, ultimately we just want to move value about, and we recognize that not everybody's going to want to use the same sidechain. So let's work on interoperability as well.
So there's a lot of overlap with Interledger and these side chains too, right? Like how do those two work together?
Yeah, so there is, in terms of like the concept, right? They're both interoperability mechanisms to interoperate between two different ledgers. But and I had this question as well, right? Because I wasn't quite sure what the distinction was. And the main difference is with Interledger is that it's about streaming payments. So with Interledger, you don't receive, if I send you $5, you don't receive a single $5 transaction. What you will receive is a stream of pennies until we reach $5, right? So, and that's great for the use case that Interledger was trying to work with, but not necessarily what everybody needs. Now, you could have an Interledger, you could have a federator that can understand the Interledger protocol, and you could kind of receive streamed payments in via Interledger. And when it gets to a certain amount, it then makes a transaction on the main network and, effectively deposits those payments. That could be a way, so you could have the federator bridging to Interledger as well. There's lots of different ways you could put these things together.
I like that. It's kind of some composability like they have in DeFi, but with XRP. All right, yeah. Sorry if there's a little gap there. Had some issues with file space. But to wrap this up, Matt, I just want to thank you for coming on with me and Mickey. I think we had some great conversation about different aspects of the XRP ledger. And also, I enjoyed that you went into the history there. But before we let you go, I just want to see if there's any resources you think people should check out that's good for seeing development going on, or just to learn more about the XRP ledger in general.
Sure. Yeah. If you go to xrpl.org, there's a whole section. There's a section called concepts that you can go into. And there's a whole load of information there about basically the mechanics of the XRP ledger, how it works, and how different aspects of it, fit into it all. And then the other thing I'll mention is the Twitch stream. So twitch.tv/RippleXDev. And I stream on there generally every Tuesday, sometimes more often. And if you go and follow on there, you'll get notification when we go live. But I have different technical guests on generally each week that come and talk about, what they're building.
Awesome. And you guys also post the replays on cinnamon.video, correct?
Yeah. So if you go to cinnamon.video/RippleXDev, you'll see the replays. I've got a little bit of a backlog I've got to upload to there. But yeah, if you go to cinnamon.video/RippleXDev, you'll find the replays there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, the Twitch streams are really great. I suggest people check them out. When you guys did that NFT one with a couple of the XRP community devs, my mind was blown by what is
That,
already
that
capable.
that was one of my favorite ones so far doing that.
Yeah.
That was brilliant, just seeing, because what was amazing with that was it was two people from the XRP community that didn't even know each other and hadn't even met. And one of them was like, hey, I've created this thing. And another one was like, well, I'm taking the thing you just created and I'm building a virtual gallery with it. Right. And it was just like, wow. Yeah, it was amazing. It was really good.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was Matt Hamilton.